The plane hummed softly, and the first-class cabin lights sparkled like a halo. A man in an elegant navy blue suit holding a first-class ticket walked onto the plane. But instead of a polite greeting, he received suspicious glares and cold interrogations simply because of the color of his skin. "Sorry, sir, first class is not available for economy passengers," the flight attendant said, her voice loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. He didn't yell. He didn't walk away. He simply sat down in the seat he had bought with his own sweat and talent, and that silence made the entire power structure tremble, because the person they were trying to humiliate that day wasn't a stranger. It was Marcus Bennett, a civil rights attorney, the one holding the pen that would decide the fate of a $1-2 billion deal for this airline. If you want to understand how a small act of prejudice can bring down an empire if you believe silence is never the answer, then stay with us. Don't forget to like, share this story to spread fairness, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next powerful journeys. Now let's begin the story. "Sorry, business class is not available for economy class passengers." She didn't lower her voice. The statement was loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. All eyes immediately turned to her, heavy and scrutinizing, and there, Marcus Bennett stood still in a neatly tailored suit, holding a legitimate first-class ticket, yet being treated like an intruder in a place that wasn't meant for him. No apology, no hesitation, just a contemptuous look, one that seemed to scream, "You don't belong here." The flight attendant didn't check the passenger list, nor did she bother to ask any questions. She made her judgment by default, and when Marcus calmly sat down as though he were the rightful owner of that seat, Samantha Cross didn't stop. She became even more adamant, threatening to call security, citing airline policy. But what Samantha didn't know was that the man she was trying to humiliate in front of the indifferent eyes of the entire business class was not just any passenger. Marcus was the one holding the legal pen that would decide a billion-dollar contract with this very airline. And when the plane landed, Samantha didn't just lose a little dignity. She had contributed to shaking the foundation of an empire. This is not just a story about discrimination. It is a wake-up call about what happens when hidden biases manifest into action, when arrogance collides with true power, and when a quiet man decides not to remain silent anymore. Marcus Bennett boarded Flight 318 with the quiet but commanding presence of a man who is used to winning the hardest battles. No flashy accessories, no diamonds on his wrist, no bodyguards, just a sharp navy blue suit, a minimalist leather briefcase, and a posture that made people respect him without being asked. He had faced federal judges and had left courtrooms many times with verdicts worth billions of dollars. As he entered the business class cabin, the warm lights highlighted the champagne glasses and the luxurious leather seats. Marcus nodded politely at the flight attendant, standing by the door. Samantha Cross, tall, sharp, and experienced. Samantha had 16 years of experience in the sky. She thought she knew who deserved to sit in business class, and in her eyes Marcus wasn't that type of person. Her gaze quickly swept from his face to his ticket, then stopped at the color of his skin. A thin smile passed her lips, full of meaning and contempt. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone polite to the point of being mocking. "I'm just looking for my seat," Marcus replied, handing over his ticket. "Seat 1A business class. Legitimate ticket." No confusion. Samantha stared at the ticket, longer than necessary. "Are you sure this is your section, sir?" she asked, loud enough for a few nearby passengers to look back. Marcus maintained his calm expression, but the coldness in her tone didn't escape him. "I'm sure." Samantha still didn't relent. She tapped on the tablet screen where it clearly displayed Marcus's valid seat confirmation, but logic didn't slow down her bias. "Sir, I need to ask you to step aside while I verify with the check-in desk," she said, her voice lower and firmer. Marcus didn't react. He moved aside with the calmness of someone accustomed to being scrutinized before being heard. Passengers continued to walk past him, some glancing curiously, others pretending not to notice. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Samantha returned, lips tight, her voice short. "Sorry, Mr. Bennett. We found an error with your reservation. I need to invite you to follow me." Marcus looked her directly in the eye. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" "I'll let airport security explain it to you," Samantha answered, just as two TSA agents approached from the bridge. "This man is occupying a business class seat, but we haven't verified his reservation." Samantha said quickly, as though passing off the responsibility. Marcus stood still, his eyes never leaving her. "You've seen my ticket. You know it's valid, but you don't believe I have the right to sit here." One of the TSA agents appeared uncomfortable. He looked at the ticket and confirmed. "The ticket is completely valid, sir." Without even needing to look, Marcus knew that William Preston, sitting nearby, was watching him with a look of disgust. William was a senior partner at an old real estate company accustomed to ordering people around and valuing power above all else. Tall, with a square jaw and cold eyes. William watched the entire situation unfold, not bothering to hide his disdain. Now he leaned in close to Samantha, who was clearing the service cart, and whispered just loud enough for Marcus to hear. "This is starting to make everyone uncomfortable. Maybe you should move him down to the lower cabin where he belongs." Samantha Cross did not show any hesitation. With a slight nod, she quickly walked towards Marcus, her face now devoid of a smile, replaced with cold, hard determination. "Mr. Bennett," she raised her voice higher than necessary, "I need you to gather your personal belongings. We will be making a small change to your seating arrangement." Marcus remained seated, unmoving. His voice was deep and calm, but this time it carried a sharp edge. "I'm sitting in the assigned seat. Ms. Cross, everything is clear." Samantha quickly glanced at William Preston before turning back to face Marcus. "I have spoken with another senior passenger." She raised her chin in defiance. "And to ensure the comfort of everyone, we will be moving you to an equivalent seat in the rear section." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his voice not loud, but the anger in it unmistakable. So now the airline decides to move passengers based on the discomfort of others. I didn't realize that discomfort was a valid reason to force someone out of their seat. A few murmurs spread through the surrounding seats, but Samantha didn't back down. "Sir, I ask that you cooperate." "And I," Marcus replied, "request that you provide a legal reason for this action, because what you are doing is clearly discrimination. And we both understand that before Samantha could respond, a woman in the row behind them, apparently a tech entrepreneur, raised her phone slightly higher. Her video recording app was open with the screen flashing red, indicating live recording. Marcus glanced over and realized someone had finally decided to record the truth. Samantha noticed it too. She quickly walked toward the woman, her voice lowering and cold. "Ma'am, please stop recording immediately." According to airline policy, passengers are not allowed to record staff or our activities without permission. The woman held the phone at eye level. "This is no longer a private matter." She replied bluntly, "I'm recording evidence of a potential legal violation. You are targeting a man simply because of his skin color, and I have proof Samantha maintained a cold expression. Delete the footage now, or I will report you to the legal department for violating FAA regulations." The woman hesitated for a moment before gently tapping the screen to lower the phone, but before she did, she whispered to Marcus, "I've saved a copy to the cloud." Marcus gave a slight nod, his gaze appreciative, but still calm. "They don't like evidence," he whispered, "because it leaves them no room to deny it." Samantha now began to show signs of unease. She turned back to face Marcus, her voice softer, though the insincerity was still evident. "We just want the flight to go smoothly, Mr. Bennett." Marcus didn't look up from his stack of documents. "Then I suggest you stop trying to remove me from a seat I've paid for." He paused his pen, his voice lower. "Because if you continue, your airline won't just have to handle complaints. You'll be facing lawsuits." Those words were like a lightning strike in the air. Samantha clenched the strap of her tablet, but didn't respond. She silently turned away, muttering something to the other attendants, her face no longer bearing the usual confidence. At the same time, William Preston leaned back, chuckling derisively. People who think of themselves as victims always use racism to justify their actions. Marcus didn't turn around. He didn't need to. The entire cabin heard the venom in those words. But this time, a young man dressed in a smart suit across the aisle spoke up. "You mean acting like requesting a staff member to move someone just because you feel uncomfortable?" William spun around to respond, but the young man continued. "We all see exactly what's going on. This has nothing to do with comfort. It has everything to do with skin color." A few other passengers nodded in agreement. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted. For the first time, Marcus felt a subtle but distinct movement. A wave was forming. Samantha stood off to the side, whispering continuously into her earpiece, trying to regain control through internal channels. Marcus had endured far more subtle insults than this, but rarely had humiliation been so publicly exposed and blatantly shameless as it was today. Samantha returned to the passenger cabin, trying to maintain a calm expression, though her hands betrayed her anxiety. She quickly scrolled through the tablet screen as if hoping to find a reason to justify her actions. Her voice through the earpiece became low, quick and tense. "Operations Department, please verify seat 1A. There might be a change we haven't updated yet." Passenger name Marcus Bennett. She glanced quickly at Marcus, then buried her head back in the screen. From the corner of the galley, Lily Carter. The young flight attendant quietly watched. She had been in the industry for less than a year, carrying principles of service, respect, and fairness in her heart. What she had witnessed over the past 20 minutes stirred an unprecedented feeling of discomfort in her, unable to ignore it any longer. Lily approached Samantha, her voice almost a whisper. "I checked the list before boarding," she said. Seat 1A was assigned to Mr. Marcus Bennett from the beginning. No changes at all. Samantha turned to her like a predator, sensing danger. Her voice was icy low enough for only the two of them to hear, "Be careful with what you say." Lily stood tall, her gaze calm but resolute. She understood that threat all too well. He was not a last-minute upgrade case, and there was no extra ticket. Lily Carter said, her voice steady and certain. "We are lying. Everyone here knows that Samantha Cross narrowed her eyes sharp as a blade. This is not your decision," she hissed. "I am the head flight attendant on this flight. If you dare to defy me in front of the passengers again, I will not hesitate to report your conduct to HR. Do you understand?" Lily clenched her fists, her eyes never leaving Samantha. After a moment, she gave a stiff nod and turned away, holding back the words of protest that burned in her throat. She knew all too well the consequences of being labeled as difficult to cooperate in the early days of her career. From the opposite row of seats, Marcus Bennett silently observed. He noticed the tense shoulders of Lily, her eyes briefly glancing at him before quickly looking away. She had tried, he understood, that look. It reminded him of the courtrooms where even a glance could weigh as much as 1,000 words. Near the emergency exit, the woman who had recorded the earlier argument was quickly typing on her phone. Marcus could see her lips moving as she typed the caption, "Passenger targeted simply because of his skin color. Airline staff lying about seating." She hit the post button. Within seconds, the post began to spread. Meanwhile, Samantha returned to the aisle. She tried to maintain a professional demeanor, but the cracks had begun to show. "Dear passengers," she raised her voice, "we apologize for this small delay. There was a technical issue with our seating allocation system, but everything has now been resolved. Thank you for your patience." The lie hung in the air, heavy and clear. Marcus didn't say a word, but he could feel the change. The passengers, who had been silently observing, began to whisper among themselves, their voices less restrained. A woman sitting in the row ahead leaned her head toward her husband and whispered, "There's no system error. They're covering something up." The young man who had defended Marcus earlier also gave him a small nod, a gesture that was small but meaningful. But Samantha didn't stop. She approached Marcus again, her smile thin and cold. "I must remind you any further, disruptions will be recorded as violations of policy," she said, her tone laced with threat. "The airline has procedures for handling such cases." Marcus looked up, his gaze cold as steel. "What violation are you referring to? The fact that I have a valid ticket, that I refuse to bow to discrimination, or that I will not silently accept being erased?" Samantha tightened her lips but didn't respond. She simply turned away, walking a little faster than usual. From the service area, Lily Carter quietly watched her chest, feeling squeezed by the tug of ideals versus reality. She had dreamed of traveling the world, of serving passengers with respect and fairness. But now she felt like she was performing in a play she never agreed to participate in. Silently, she stepped into the service corridor, opened her phone. Not posting, not calling for help, just opening the Notes app and starting to record every detail, every lie, every order, every threat, just in case the truth needed to be proven. In Seat 1A, Marcus knew the battle was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. He understood that sometimes the greatest punishment didn't come from words, but from the invisible pressure that had forced so many, like Lily, to remain silent in fear. Meanwhile, Samantha continued to patrol the cabin, the forced smile still plastered on her face. Her confidence had cracked, but the power was still in her hands, and she knew power was what mattered most. As she reached the galley at the front of the cabin, Samantha leaned in and whispered to Margaret Hayes, the middle-aged flight attendant clutching her clipboard. "They think wearing a nice suit and having a law degree is enough to sit on par with us, but they'll never belong here. Not in business class, and certainly not in this world." Margaret didn't respond. She only quietly gazed toward the curtain, pretending not to hear. But someone else had heard. Marcus didn't need to read lips to understand every word. His hearing, honed through hundreds of court cases, easily picked up those venomous remarks, and he knew in the legal world acknowledgement was evidence. At the same time, in Seat 4D, near the emergency exit, a quiet man set his tablet down. He silently pulled a second phone from inside his suit jacket, a business phone untraceable. This man was not a random passenger. His name did not appear on the passenger list under any corporation. His ticket had no special notes, but his presence was intentional. He had been assigned to this flight to quietly assess the service quality in an internal review initiated by senior management, following increasing reports of biased behavior on international first-class flights. He had witnessed everything from the fabricated seating change, the public humiliation, to the whispered discriminatory implications. And now, hearing Samantha's cruel words, he knew that things had crossed a line that could no longer be denied. The mysterious man in Seat 4D quickly typed a short message to the Internal Monitoring Department. "Flag. This flight audio verified. The crew's behavior violates anti-discrimination policy. Cabin cameras have recorded full video and audio. Request immediate data retention." After sending the message, he slipped the phone back into his vest pocket, took a sip of soda, and continued observing as though nothing had happened. In Seat 1A, Marcus Bennett had stopped pretending to read the documents. His mind was now focused on one thing: advantage. He had meticulously recorded every event minute by minute in his personal notes app. He knew the name of every crew member involved. He also remembered the faces of every passenger who witnessed it. And now he had the evidence that Samantha Cross's actions were not a one-time outburst, but a deeply ingrained habit. A pattern of behavior like that, coupled with the right legal pressure, wouldn't just cost one individual their job. It could bring down the entire corporate culture that hides discrimination behind a shiny facade. At that moment, the woman who had tried to record the earlier argument quietly approached near the restroom, slightly leaning toward Marcus's row. "The flight attendant who spoke to you has already been recorded," she whispered. Someone behind us heard and recorded that. "It's pretty bad." Marcus didn't look up. He simply nodded slightly and replied quietly, Tell them to hold on to that recording. Don't post it online. It's not the time yet. Trust me." The woman seemed a bit surprised, but nodded in agreement and returned to her seat. Every second that passed now served a strategy. No need for official announcements, no loud debates, but the indignation had begun to spread throughout the cabin. A man in the business class section leaned out into the aisle, looking toward Marcus. A teenage girl in seat 2C removed her headphones and listened intently. In the suffocating silence, something was slowly taking shape. Samantha Cross, still thinking she could turn things around, walked up to the front of the cabin, intently checking the passenger list. She still believed she could regain control, but what she didn't know was that the internal mic connected to the cabin system had recorded every word of the discriminatory remarks she had whispered to Margaret Hayes. Something had changed, something irreversible. Even the passengers who had remained silent now realized that today's incident was no longer just about a seating mix-up. Marcus sat still in seat 1A, his back straight, his gaze sharp, every movement purposeful, as if he were a lawyer preparing to enter cross-examination rather than a passenger about to reach his destination. On the fold-out tray in front of him, his laptop was open, with legal documents displayed. But his mind wasn't focused on those words. He was waiting not in a passive stance, but like a chess player, fully controlling the middle game. From the cockpit, a safety warning light blinked on Ethan Brooks' device, the mid-level supervisor who had boarded the plane only 20 minutes ago. For a routine check, Ethan had been through hundreds of flights over the past decade, handling everything from unstable weather to minor crises caused by VIP passengers. But today, what caught his attention wasn't the usual disruptions. It was the fact that headquarters had flagged a passenger mid-flight following an urgent alert from the legal department. Standing in the front galley, Ethan opened the passenger list and immediately understood when he read the name that stood out: Marcus Bennett. This name wasn't just familiar. It was life or death. Significant. Marcus Bennett wasn't just a first-class passenger. He was a senior legal advisor for a private investment group in the final stages of a $1.2 billion acquisition deal with the very airline's board of directors. A deal that could reshape the future of the entire corporation, inject capital into the aging fleet, and expand the legal network into more than a dozen international markets. And the person they had publicly humiliated was the one holding the pen that would determine the fate of that deal. The blood in Ethan's temples pulsed. He quickly walked to the crew station, opened the internal cabin recording, and fast-forwarded to the flagged segment. After just a few seconds, Samantha Cross's cold voice came through clearly with words full of discrimination. Ethan didn't need to listen further. It was already crystal clear. Just then, the company tablet in his hand buzzed. An alert from the Internal Communications Department marked with a high-priority warning. The situation has reached a critical level. The passenger is identified as a strategic priority partner. Cease all further interactions. Ensure the passenger's cooperation. Secure all video data. A full report will be sent later. If leaked, the legal consequences will be severe. Without further hesitation, Ethan made his way down to the business class cabin and stopped beside Marcus Bennett. "Mr. Bennett," he said, trying to maintain calm, but unable to hide the urgency. "I'm Ethan Brooks, operations supervisor. Would you mind spending a few minutes with me in the service area?" Marcus didn't respond immediately. He slowly closed his laptop, then slowly looked up, his gaze locking onto Ethan. Sharp as a blade, "What are we talking about?" He asked, his voice deep, even, and cold. Ethan Brooks hesitated for a moment, then carefully spoke. "We want to discuss how to resolve this issue." Mr. Bennett. Marcus Bennett slowly stood up, gently closing his laptop without saying a word. He followed Ethan to the service area at the front of the plane, where Ethan lowered his voice to a level only the two of them could hear Mr. Bennett. "I've just been informed about your position at Delhi Holdings." If we had known earlier, Marcus cut him off, his voice smooth but as sharp as a blade. "You mean if I were just a nobody, this treatment would have been acceptable?" Ethan paused, choosing his words more carefully before answering. "No, sir. What happened shouldn't have happened to anyone, but clearly it did, and now we need to resolve it before things spiral out of control." Marcus crossed his arms over his chest, his gaze as cold as ice. "It's too late for that." Ethan didn't argue. He played the final card still in his hand. "I've been authorized to escalate this matter directly to the Senior Handling Department. They're drafting an official apology, a statement of responsibility, and a compensation package." Marcus raised his hand, cutting him off. "Don't insult me with a payout. I don't need an upgraded seat. I want a system overhaul, and I want Samantha Cross suspended immediately, pending a full investigation." Ethan nodded stiffly. "I'll make the call." Marcus squinted. "You'll do more than that. I want a written confirmation before this plane lands." Ethan swallowed hard his fingers, typing quickly on the tablet, accessing the internal network system. At that moment, a red-haired flight attendant walked over, holding a printed internal message from the system. From her perspective, everything still seemed like just maintaining order. She didn't know Ethan's reaction. She hadn't heard the whispers circulating in the cabin. To her, Marcus was still just a troublemaker, someone who dared challenge the unspoken order of first class. She hurried past Lily Carter, ignoring the looks from the passengers who were no longer whispering, but now openly watching. She walked straight into the cockpit, leaning over Captain Daniel Foster's shoulder, who was finishing up the system check. "Captain," she said, her voice low but firm, "we may have an issue with seat 1A. The passenger is being disruptive. If this escalates, I need the authority to isolate him or remove him from the flight." Daniel Foster didn't respond immediately. He stared out at the blue sky outside the cockpit window, his hand lightly gripping the yoke. Then he slowly turned back, his gaze cold enough to make the attendant flush. "Passenger's name?" he asked, although his tone indicated he already knew the answer. "Marcus Bennett," she replied. "He's obstructing the service process." She added. Foster fell silent. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He didn't need to ask any more questions. He knew that name. What Samantha didn't know was that 2 years ago, Marcus Bennett had been the lead attorney in a discrimination lawsuit that caused Foster's previous airline's HR training program to be suspended. Marcus had faced Foster directly in the interrogation room, forcing him to admit the failures of the system Marcus had won quietly but absolutely. And Captain Foster had never forgotten that man. Now the name Marcus Bennett appeared again like a ghost from the past. Foster sat up straight. "I've read the report," he said, his voice calm but not allowing for any objections. "The problem isn't Mr. Bennett, Samantha. Stop what you're doing immediately." Samantha blinked, stunned. "With all due respect." Sir Foster cut her off, his voice. "Icy, you don't have the authority to decide anything anymore. You've already caused enough damage." Samantha froze, her eyes narrowing with resentment. "I was just trying to maintain order." "No," Foster said curtly, "you were trying to maintain power. Those two things are not the same." Samantha bit her lip, turning to leave the cockpit, her heart burning with anger, but still clinging to whatever little pride remained. In the passenger cabin, the tension shattered like thin ice. A woman in row 3B, tall and composed, in a sharp navy blue suit, her glossy heels a statement of power, stood up abruptly. Her voice rang out clearly, reverberating through the cabin like the sound of a gavel slamming down on the table. "Excuse me," she said firmly, "I've been silent long enough." The passengers around her turned their heads, some surprised, some curious. Marcus looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I am Danielle Monroe," she continued, "a civil rights attorney with the National Legal Protection Council. What I've witnessed on this flight is a blatant violation of Section 2 of the Federal Civil Rights Act." A wave of murmurs spread throughout the cabin. Samantha, just leaving the cockpit, stood frozen in the aisle. Danielle Monroe didn't blink her gaze, locking onto the crew, forcing a paying black passenger to leave his seat, refusing service. The recorded discriminatory remarks. These are all legal evidence of public discrimination. Ma'am Samantha quickly interjected, her voice tense. "I request that you sit down. You no longer have the right to make any demands." Danielle replied, her voice sharp as a blade. "You lost that right when you turned your position into a tool for harm." Marcus stood up, not hurried, not angry, but as an act of quiet affirmation. He simply nodded at Danielle, his eyes filled with silent gratitude. Around them, more and more passengers pulled out their phones and started recording. One woman whispered, "This is definitely going to go viral," a man nearby muttered. "It's about time someone spoke up." Samantha Cross's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. The entire cabin fell into tense silence after the storm, with no one sure whether what they had just witnessed would remain an isolated incident or spark a larger change. Marcus Bennett remained seated in 1A, his hands gently resting on his leather briefcase, his gaze straight ahead. It wasn't because he was indifferent to what was happening, but because in his mind he had already moved 3 steps ahead. He had been waiting for the moment the plane landed. Now it was time to act. The plane landed smoothly as the cabin gently shook with the deceleration. The intercom came on. "Dear passengers, welcome to Washington, D.C. Please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop." Before anyone could unbuckle their seatbelts, another voice, unfamiliar and confident, came through. "Mr. Marcus Bennett, please remain on the plane. A VIP team is ready to escort you." The cabin buzzed with excitement. Phones immediately went up again. Samantha's face turned green. Ethan Brooks, standing at the front, cast a look of mixed concern and helplessness toward Marcus. Marcus didn't move. He simply closed his briefcase with a gentle snap, then continued waiting. When the cabin door opened, 2 attendants in sleek black uniforms with the airline's VIP service badge stepped in. "Mr. Bennett, please follow this way," one of them said, her voice gentle. Marcus stood up, adjusting the cuff of his shirt, and walked past Samantha Cross without sparing her a glance. The silence was louder than any accusation. They led him down a separate path, completely apart from the standard jet bridge. The passengers who remained sat still, watching, as if witnessing a moment of legend. The man they thought had been humiliated was now walking through a door they would never be invited to. 10 minutes later, in the airport's high-end VIP lounge, Marcus was invited to sit with a cup of espresso, placed gently before him. No one hurried him, no one spoke. Then the email came. A soft ping signaled that a message had been sent to the inboxes of all senior executives in the airline's legal, commercial, and investment relations departments. The subject was brief: contract termination. Immediate effect: sender Washington and Cole LLP, one of the most powerful law firms on the East Coast. The message was short but devastating. Due to the confirmed racial discrimination directed at our senior partner, Mr. Marcus B. Bennett, by the crew of Flight 318, we hereby announce the immediate termination of all ongoing and pending contracts with the airline, including consulting and representation related to the strategic merger deal. Estimated contract value, $2 billion. All future communications will be handled through external legal counsel. The consequences spread rapidly like wildfire. The internal phones blinked nonstop. The legal department was in disarray. Internal communications immediately issued an urgent order. But even before they could attempt to respond, Victoria Langston, the airline's CEO, made her way to the VIP area on her own. No PR staff accompanied her. No bodyguards, just herself, with the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Entering the room, Victoria's gaze immediately found Marcus Mr. Bennett. She said, her voice low and sincere, "Thank you for waiting." Marcus didn't stand up. He didn't need to. "Ms. Langston," he replied, "I assume you've been briefed. Victoria nodded, her voice soft but clear. "I've got the situation covered. And before we discuss anything, I want to say, this I'm sorry, not only as CEO, but also as someone who's felt what you're feeling today." Marcus observed her quietly for a few seconds. "Do you remember me?" he asked. Victoria nodded slowly. 10 years ago, the Delta versus Norris case. You were the one who stood by us when no one else would. We won. I had a chance to rebuild my career." Marcus gave a slight nod. "And you promised that if you had the power, you'd change everything." "Yes," she whispered, but clearly it wasn't enough. Marcus remained silent. Then, with the sharpness of an experienced lawyer, he said, "I didn't come here for revenge. I came here to demand accountability." Meanwhile, the clips recorded in the plane cabin began spreading at lightning speed. The confrontation between Samantha Cross and Marcus Danielle Monroe's firm statement and Lily Carter's determined gaze were all captured. As dawn broke over Washington, D.C., the airline was in full crisis mode. A press conference was scheduled for 9 a.m. at headquarters. The hall was packed with reporters. Camera flashes went off incessantly, and excited murmurs filled the air. Yesterday, the name Marcus Bennett was known only within financial circles. But today, everyone would soon learn that he wasn't just a black man denied a seat. He was a symbol of change. Victoria Langston stood at the podium, her expression stern enough to silence an uproar. Before inviting Mr. Marcus Bennett to speak, she said, her voice firm, "I want to, on behalf of the entire company, the board of directors and myself, acknowledge that we have failed. We didn't just fail in serving a passenger." Victoria Langston said, her voice deep but resonant. "We failed in front of a civil rights leader, and more seriously, we betrayed the basic standards of human dignity that any passenger deserves, no matter who they are." She stepped back, giving the podium to Marcus Bennett. The flashbulbs all went off simultaneously, directed at him. Marcus stepped up to the podium with the calm demeanor of someone who had stood before Congress, advised presidents, and drafted laws, while public opinion still debated right and wrong. He adjusted the microphone quickly, scanning the room, and then began. "Good morning. I am Marcus Bennett. I am a civil rights attorney and co-founder of Washington & Cole, LLP. For the past 2 decades, I have represented disadvantaged communities, challenged unconstitutional policies, and advised federal agencies on the enforcement of fairness." Marcus paused, allowing the room to take a deep breath. "I am also one of the key advisors in establishing anti-discrimination regulations in the commercial aviation industry." The room grew quiet. The reporters leaned forward, their recorders raised higher. Marcus continued, his voice steady but sharp. 10 years ago, I worked with lawmakers to draft reforms addressing implicit bias in the aviation industry. We designed training programs, accountability systems, and frameworks to protect passenger rights. But what happened on Flight 318 was not a failure of policy. It was a failure of trust. Because no matter how many regulations there are in the end, people must choose to act right. And sadly, many still do not choose that. Marcus paused again. Camera flashes went off in rapid succession. He stared directly into the lens. "The flight attendant didn't doubt my ticket when I walked into the first-class cabin because of a system error. She doubted me because she didn't believe someone like me should be there." As the situation escalated and her decision was challenged, she didn't stop. She escalated the pressure, not because she had evidence, but because she held power. And people like her are far too accustomed to using that power without consequences. Marcus's words were sharper than any headline. I was not mistaken for anyone else. I was not moved due to a random seating mix-up. I was discriminated against. And when I resisted, the response wasn't an apology, but a threat. He glanced briefly at Victoria, then returned to the crowd. To the passengers who stood up, "I thank you. To the staff who tried to prevent this, I see you. And to those who remain silent, I understand your fear. But remember, silence protects no one. A young reporter jumped to her feet asking the first question. Mr. Bennett, what do you want from this airline? Marcus didn't blink. I want structural reform. I want accountability. I want mandatory anti-bias training. Not just once, but annually, I want an independent oversight board to monitor employee conduct. And I want all discrimination-related complaints to be made public. He paused, looking straight into the camera. If we can track flight schedules, then we can track justice. Another voice rang out. What if they don't comply? Marcus smiled faintly. If they don't, I'll make them regret it. In court, before Congress, and in the marketplace. A murmur of agreement echoed through the room. Less than 2 hours later, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, officially launched an investigation into the airline based on Samantha Cross's actions and signs of systemic violations. By early afternoon, a slew of long-term partners began issuing press releases announcing the termination of their collaborations. A luxury hotel chain wrote, "We do not tolerate injustice in any form. We will no longer cooperate with businesses that do not respect human rights." The damage didn't stop at reputation. It had turned into financial loss. The airline's stock opened down by 7%, and by noon it had plummeted more than 18%, wiping nearly $900 million off the market value. In the closed meeting room at headquarters, Victoria Langston no longer read from prepared documents. She issued orders. "This is not a media crisis," she declared firmly. "This is an institutional purge. Starting today, all recruitment processes, training programs, and employee evaluation standards will be dismantled and rebuilt from scratch." The executives around the table nodded, their expressions stiff and tense. Victoria continued. "Samantha Cross has been indefinitely suspended, pending the investigation. Termination proceedings are underway, and if the federal agency determines civil rights violations, we will fully cooperate." As the HR department drafted the termination notice, Samantha Cross was escorted out of the local operations office. Her employee badge was deactivated, all access was revoked. The name Samantha Cross, once considered the gold standard in premium cabin service, had now become the focus of a legal nightmare. Local media began posting the videos recorded on the flight. National news outlets didn't miss it either. The headline blazed across every news outlet: "Flight attendant faces federal investigation." After forcing civil rights lawyer to leave seat, in a small apartment, Samantha Cross sat silently in the dark, surrounded by unopened letters, remnants of a once glamorous life. She watched the unfolding events on the screen in absolute silence. Meanwhile, in a small law office in downtown Baltimore, Lily Carter sat at her desk, focused on her inbox. A new message appeared. "We've seen your courage. Let's talk. Sender National Whistleblower Alliance." Her heart raced, but not from fear. For the first time, she felt a strange sense of relief. The decision to speak out, once met with threats and isolation, was now being recognized. Across the United States, consumer protection organizations launched campaigns demanding reform in the aviation industry. Petitions calling for transparency in passenger treatment quickly spread. A social media post with over 12 million views asked a simple question: how many times has this happened without a Marcus Bennett on board? And in the boardrooms of other airlines, a different fear began to spread. If it happened to them, it could happen to us. In Washington, D.C., Marcus had an informal meeting with members of the House Transportation Committee. A female congresswoman spoke up. "We want to hold hearings. We need your presence." Marcus nodded. "I'll participate. But I won't stand there as a victim. I'll stand there as a witness to what needs to change." That evening, Victoria Langston appeared in a video sent to all employees of the company. No makeup, no polished lighting, no scripted words. She looked straight into the camera. "We have failed." She began, her voice deep but steady. And we will not pretend this is just an isolated incident. Bias thrives on silence, and silence is nurtured by culture. Starting today, we will no longer be silent. Starting today, this company will start over. At the heart of all these changes was Marcus Bennett now, not just a renowned attorney, but a national voice for justice and equality. Since the events of Flight 318, Marcus had advised 3 airline boards, 2 Senate committees, and helped establish a federal task force dedicated to combating discrimination in public services. But today's conference meant something very personal to him. The final topic of the seminar, From Crisis to Healing, the path from harm to change. On the list of speakers, one name stood out, Samantha Cross. She sat silently in the front row, her hands clasped together, her face humble, her gaze thoughtful. The proud uniform was gone. Instead, she wore a simple navy blue blazer. No makeup, no fuss, only honesty remained. A year ago, she had witnessed the sudden collapse of her career. It was followed by months of public judgment and long, lonely nights of despair. At first, she blamed the media, the airline, even Marcus. But all those defensive walls crumbled the night her teenage daughter Madison asked her with innocent eyes, "Why are you angry at him? You don't even know him." That question cut deeper than any critical article. For months, Samantha avoided interviews, rejected all offers, and turned down therapy proposals. But one day, she quietly accepted an offer to participate in a free counseling program from an organization dedicated to helping people remove unconscious bias. At first, she joined with caution, fully defensive. But gradually, through documentary viewings, case studies, and stories from people she had inadvertently hurt, she began to see herself no longer as a victim, but as part of the problem. In the fall, she enrolled in a restorative justice and anti-bias training course. By winter, she had the courage to stand in front of a small group of college students and share her first lesson. And now, standing behind the curtain waiting, she was no longer the arrogant flight attendant she once was. She had chosen to change. When introduced, Marcus simply said one sentence without any fanfare. The next speaker was once part of the problem, but today she chooses to be part of the solution. Samantha stepped onto the stage. She took a deep breath, looking out at the sea of faces, knowing there were still eyes filled with prejudice. Among them, "I never thought I'd stand here." She began her voice, trembling slightly. "A year ago, I thought I was just doing my duty. I believed I was maintaining order. I believed I wasn't the problem. But I was wrong." She clenched her hands, staying calm. "I didn't know who Marcus Bennett was when he boarded that plane that day. I didn't see his track record. I only saw what I had been quietly trained for over the years, that people like him didn't belong there. And I acted on that bias. I humiliated an innocent man. And worse, I convinced myself I was right." The room went silent. Samantha looked up. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to say that if someone like me, someone who believed they were fair, can recognize their own blindness, then anyone can do it. But only if they're willing to listen, to learn again, and to take responsibility." She paused, her gaze turning to Marcus. "Marcus, I was wrong, deeply, and I am grateful that your strength not only exposed my mistakes, but gave me the opportunity to change." A soft round of applause started, hesitant at first, but gradually it grew louder and stronger. Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand. Samantha took his hand firmly. No grand words, no drama, just understanding. After that event, Samantha never returned to the airline industry. She chose a different path, training employees in various service industries, sharing her story not as a tragedy, but as a testimony that redemption is possible if we start with honesty and accountability. On that flight, they tried to bring down a man just because he was different. But it was that very action that awakened an entire system that had been sleeping on privilege and silence. Marcus Bennett didn't seek revenge. He didn't need to shout or slam his fist to demand justice. He simply did what he's done for the last 20 years. He stood up quietly. He recorded every injustice, and he turned it into change. It was Marcus's courage that made the passengers who once stayed silent find their voices. It was his calmness that forced the most powerful people to bow their heads in admission of wrongdoing. And it was that story that spread like wildfire, making the airline industry unable to ignore it. Samantha Cross, the flight attendant, once proud of her shiny uniform, also had to face herself. A simple question from her teenage daughter shattered all the walls she had built to justify her actions. "Mom, why are you mad at him? You don't even know him." From that moment, Samantha chose the harder path, not to avoid, not to blame. She faced the truth, relearned from the beginning, and used that painful lesson to help others avoid making the same mistake. When she stepped on stage, nervously admitting that she had once been blind, the room fell completely silent. Not because of judgment, but because everyone understood. Admitting a mistake doesn't make you weak. It's the beginning of courage. This story isn't just about a man holding his dignity. It's not just about an airline losing $1.2 billion. It's not just about a flight attendant finding her conscience. This is a story about us, about choosing to listen rather than judge, about choosing to act instead of turning away, about realizing that justice isn't a grand concept far away, but starts with the small moments when you see injustice and decide not to remain silent. The journey from harm to healing, from mistakes to change, isn't easy, but it can happen as long as we're brave enough to take that first step. If this story touched your heart, help us spread the message. Like, to support fairness. Share this video so more people know that change is real. And don't forget to subscribe to join us in writing more human stories, lighting the way with kindness. Comment below. What moment in the story moved you the most? We'd love to hear your feelings. See you on the next journey.